Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News, broadcast to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, the heightened state of security alert continues to reign in Israel in wake of evident attempts by the Islamist Hamas organization to spark unrest on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the West Bank districts of Judea and Samaria, and Arab communities in northern Israel. Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, lambasts the international community for refusing to accept the truth of reality in relation to those responsible for instigating violence on Jerusalem's Temple Mount and beyond. Israeli National Security Advisor Eyal Hulata is currently in Washington for deliberations chiefly focused on the Islamic Republic of Iran, including preparations to guarantee that the Ayatollah regime never achieves nuclear weapon capabilities. The high state of security alert continues to reign in Israel in wake of evident attempts by the Islamist Hamas organization to spark unrest on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the West Bank districts of Judea and Samaria, and Arab communities in northern Israel. The presiding security assessment indicates that Hamas hopes to destabilize the aforementioned locations by means of its branch in Lebanon, with its apparent intention of keeping the Gaza Strip out of the equation in order to prevent a potential escalation with Israel. And while Jerusalem's security and diplomatic establishments are actively engaged to prevent Hamas's efforts to destabilize Israel from materializing, since hostilities which emanated from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip ceased in recent days, Israel reopened its commercial border crossing with the Palestinian enclave after robust efforts by Egyptian mediators were deemed successful. Nevertheless, Israeli security officials highlighted that keeping the crossing open, alongside other civilian measures for the civilian population of the Gaza Strip, is solely dependent on Hamas, which has the ability to ensure that the security stability be maintained. Turning to the United Nations headquarters in New York, where Israeli Ambassador Gilad Erdan lambasted the international community for refusing to accept the truth of reality. Speaking ahead of a UN Security Council meeting on the latest developments related to the Middle East, which systematically focuses on the Israel-Palestinian conflict rather than other regional threats, Israel's envoy to the world body stressed the absurdity of the repetitive session.
The focus of the debate this morning will sadly be on the lies fabricated by terror organizations regarding the situation in Jerusalem and on the Temple Mount, and not on the real critical threats to the Middle East. The threats, as you know, namely Iran and its dangerous nuclear program or its proxies like Hezbollah destabilizing the region. On the Temple Mount, violence is incited and perpetrated only by a mob of Palestinian terrorists trying to hijack the holy site and inflame Jerusalem. This chaos and violence endangers Muslim worshippers and threatens Jews praying at the Western Wall. As a result, Israeli police had to intervene, showing exemplary restraint. Police protected the right to worship and succeeded in restoring law and order.
Ambassador Erdan continued by highlighting the Council's adopted narrative, which seeks to keep all of its members happy by promoting a single narrative at the expense of genuinely facing reality on the ground.
International bodies made far-fetched calls for calm from both sides. From both sides? Who are these sides? On the one side, we have the mobs of bloodthirsty terrorists calling to murder Jews, carrying weapons into their place of worship, throwing firebombs and rocks from mosque windows, and shooting firecrackers from within their holy sites. On the other side, we have a law-abiding democracy which ensures the freedom of worship for all, is committed to protecting holy sites, and shows respect and restraint before using minimal force only when necessary to protect others. And calls are made for calm for both sides? How detached from reality has the international community become? Terror groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad have spun a web of lies absurdly pointing the finger of blame at Israel for the violent riots that they themselves organized and carried out. If this narrative of lies is spread, the violent acts of terror will only escalate.
The Israeli ambassador to the UN went on to stress his refusal to let falsehoods dominate the narrative.
The truth couldn't be more clearer. All of the events on the Temple Mount have been captured on camera. Photos and video footage showing exactly who is to blame for the chaos and violence are accessible to all. Yet, when I requested to show this footage to the members of the council at the debate, I was sadly denied. You all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a video from a reliable source is worth 1,000,000 words. Just like the ostrich, many have buried their heads in the ground. Why bother with the facts and the truth when you can just blame Israel or make a false moral comparison between a vibrant democracy and terror organizations?
The narrative, which Ambassador Erdan spoke of, relates to the Palestinian demand of recognizing all lands which the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan lost during the Six-Day War as Palestinian territories that were illegally occupied by Israel. This narrative was once again highlighted by the Palestinian observer to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, who stressed that Israeli police officers ensuring the peace on Jerusalem's Temple Mount should not be present on the ancient compound in the first place, since the Palestinian Authority rejects any Israeli claims of sovereignty over Jerusalem and the so-called West Bank territories.
Why are the occupation forces there in the first place? This is what Israel hopes you will forget, that East Jerusalem is occupied and unlawfully annexed in breach of the UN Charter. Israel has no rightful claim or sovereignty over any part of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Israel has no authority over the Al-Haram al-Sharif, where the historic and legal status quo must be upheld, and the authority of the Islamic Waqf and the custodianship of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan must be respected.
The United Nations Special Coordinator for Mideast Peace Process, Tor Veneslon, for his part, voiced regret over this period's violent events, stressing the necessity for political, religious, and community leaders on all sides to do their part to reduce tensions.
Sadly, this period has been marked by violence in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and terror attacks in Israel, which have killed and injured scores of civilians. In Jerusalem, the situation remains relatively calm, despite inflammatory rhetoric and violent clashes between Palestinians and Israeli security forces that have taken place at the holy sites. In Gaza, the launching of rockets is undermining the fragile stability that has prevailed since May.
Israeli Ambassador Gilad Erdan, following up on his pledge to focus on the real threat to Mideast stability, highlighted the Islamic Republic of Iran's overtly proclaimed intentions to annihilate the Jewish state.
Iran, the member state openly threatening Israel with annihilation, will have enough uranium for a nuclear bomb in weeks. How is it possible that the body tasked with global security does not dedicate the majority of this debate on the Middle East to the Iranian nuclear threat? Shouldn't preventing radical Islamists from acquiring weapons of mass destruction be a top priority of this council? Try to imagine what the Middle East will look like when Iran's terror proxies can operate under a nuclear umbrella.
It is important to know that Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett held a phone conversation with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres over the weekend, during which he expressed his disappointment at the absence of condemnation by the United Nations for the firing of rockets at Israel. He stressed, quote, The international community must not serve the agenda of the terrorist organizations. Israel is destabilizing force. If we did not uphold order, tens of thousands of Muslims would not be able to pray. Separately, Premier Bennett also spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden on Sunday, during which ongoing efforts to lower tensions in and around Israel were discussed. Furthermore, Bennett and Biden also discussed the Iranian issue and specifically spoke about Iran's demand to remove the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps from the list of terror organizations. It is important to know that Israeli National Security Advisor Eyal Hulata is currently in Washington for deliberations chiefly focused on the Islamic Republic of Iran, including preparations to guarantee that the Ayatollah regime never achieves nuclear weapon capabilities in the event that efforts to revive the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action fails. Thank you for watching us. I would like to once again seize this opportunity to encourage you. If you're blessed by TV7 Israel News, please consider making a contribution to allow us to sustain our ongoing operations here in Jerusalem, which are exclusively based on the generosity of our dedicated viewers just like yourself. Separately, I would like to encourage you to persist with prayer for our persecuted brothers and sisters worldwide, in addition to our ongoing prayers for the peace of Jerusalem and the salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan, wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and we will see you again tomorrow at the same time.